Welcome back, everybody. It's another episode of Connection Prosper. I'm your co-host, Chris Angel, here with your host, Chaz Wilson. Chaz, today we're talking about finding your voice.
Yes, sir.
Finding your voice.
Finding your voice.
It's
tough,
that's
right?
that's so ambiguous, or it's so ethereal, maybe.
Yeah, especially when it comes to marketing, right?
Well, that's what I before we hit record here, I was asking Chaz, how do you decide what you choose to invest in or spend time in terms of marketing? Because there's so many different directions you could go. And I'm sure that you've experimented with a lot of them, right? From this show is a form of marketing, to the stuff you do on Facebook, to YouTube. You have a YouTube channel that I know you've been active in inviting people to subscribe to.
Yeah.
How do you choose where you market?
Yeah, so I think what I said was it's all about finding your voice before we started. It's all about finding your voice. And so the reason why I said that is you and I have had this conversation. So one of the things I want to point out is your social media posts, the things you write. It's almost like a diary of your thoughts or where you are. And I said to you, I'm like, I can't do that. You're really good at writing those things down to a point where when I read them, I'm captivated by what you write. That I'm like, oh, I relate to that. I can put myself in those same shoes where I can't do that. So it's about finding your voice. Your voice, you seem to be able to do that very well in written form, as well as auditory. You're very good at that as well. For me, it's almost all the auditory. So for instance, this is why I decided to do a podcast like this, because it's very easy for me. I don't have to give it a tremendous amount of not effort, but just like it overwhelms some people to have to do this, right? Turn the camera on and start talking.
Right.
That's why I've learned that over time. So I had to be patient, and a lot of error in writing blog posts and them not being very good and those kinds of things, realizing that is not where my voice is.
Yeah. I think I call this your format, like finding your format. When you can find so writing is a format. Direct to camera, like turning on a camera and speaking one person, you directly into the camera, is a format. An interview, this is a format. When you find if you just look in your life at where you're good, where you shine, that's a format. And if you could then just capture that format, you start to get closer to your voice.
Yeah, so I think you're right. We basically have two different things. It's finding the right format and then finding your voice. So for me, I get interviewed a lot on podcasts. I get a lot of interviews on camera. In fact, when we go shoot video, we'll turn the camera on for a 60-minute session, and I can get anywhere from 25 to 40 different videos shot in that time.
Wow.
And it frustrates other folks on our team or other people we've had in, because they're like, man, I had 60 minutes. I got 3 done, like 3 videos, and a lot of takes and a lot of edits and a lot of stops.
Yeah.
And that's just because that's the format that I like and I can just simply do. And so you shouldn't get frustrated by that if it's not the right format. Then there's the finding your voice within that.
Yeah.
And that's the other part of it. In fact, we were just talking about that today, how there's guys, I listen to their podcasts, right? And they use a ton of profanity. This is not my thing, but that's how they've, I guess, found their voices. That's one of their things. That's not my thing. So how do I find my voice? My voice for me is just speaking from my heart to those who are listening, and then sharing the things I'm going through. So that's how I found my voice.
I think it's like it's interesting. If we had to diagram or dissect what the voice is, like the characteristics of or pieces of the voice, like what would you say are parts of the voice? Like the first thing that jumps into my mind is like conviction. When you find your voice, there will always be conviction behind what you say. What other things about the voice are an attribute?
Yeah. So 2 things that jumped out to me. You just said a conviction. Like when I read the things you post, or when you shoot a video, and you're sort of going through things that you're experiencing, or the thoughts or the feelings or emotions you're at. I believe you believe them. See, there's a difference. You don't need to help me believe it. I just need to believe you believe it.
Yeah, it's good.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is that it's got to be authentic. And that's where I think, and in fact, I learned that the hard way. I think there was times I got on stage, or I did podcasts, or I did webinars, or spoke in front of groups, and I tried to be like another speaker. Right? I tried to be like someone else.
Yeah.
And I know other people in our organization and people I've worked closely with as I've started to have more influence maybe or have bigger stages to speak on, they'd say, man, Chaz, I just can't be like you. And I'm like, that's perfect. Like, don't be like me.
Yeah.
Like, that's not the point. Find you and be like you. And that's how you be. So I think conviction and authenticity, it's comes through as sincerity.
I definitely think like, because I noticed like people will get inspired by, let's say they saw you speak on stage and like, man, I wish I could do that. And so that there's a moment that happened. There was a spark and an inspiration, and they're like, I want to do that. But then without investigating their own voice, like what is their what do they have a convicted perspective on?
Yes.
And what's a good format for them? They don't have a frame of reference for how to do it. So all they're left with is, well, I guess I have to do it like that, but I don't know how to do that. You know? So I think a lot of people never get into creating or sharing their perspective, their voice, because they just don't know how to do it.
Well, and if you don't try something, like the interesting thing is I was a terribly shy kid and now I speak on stages and have a networking organization. It's, you know,
right.
But if I hadn't tried to find my voice, I would never be there. So then the question, I'm curious of the question, if someone has their voice, and of course we want them to try, have you had somebody who's attempted to do a podcast like this and realized it's not the right format?
Yeah. I don't know if they realize that. I think I realized that for them maybe. Yeah. You're like, maybe it's not the best format. But on the flip side of that, I've had people who are really nervous to do it. And once they get into it, they're like, wow, that was a lot easier. In fact, that's the common thing. People get into something like this, where it's an interview. They're being interviewed and it's way easier than they thought.
Yeah. And that's why I love this format. That's why I love and I look forward to these opportunities for us to do this. And I listen to others who have podcasts and interviews because I think there's a conviction, there's a sincerity and authenticity with the message that's coming across. And that's why I prefer to listen to those.
I think when you're finding your voice, you just have to, it's so much easier. Like the reality is everybody already has an opinion. Like you listening to this already have an opinion about whatever, about marketing, about business, about marriage, about raising kids, like whatever it is, you already have an opinion. The place that it gets fuzzy is when you start to, like you said, when we leave authenticity and we start to try to say what we think we're supposed to say or be who we think we're supposed to be, rather than just saying what we have conviction about.
So that's probably the most powerful piece of this episode of this podcast is that point right there. I did a webinar a couple of weeks ago for a leadership training call, did a webinar style, and I shared with people the successes to growing their own networking group. And a week later, I got an email that a couple of people canceled their membership, deactivated in Master Networks. And the response was, it said that I said something offensive or I offended them in my leadership call. And like some of the team members went back and listened to it and they're like, seriously, we can't even find anything that could remotely be offensive. And I said, they're like, do you want to go back and listen to it? I'm like, no, I don't want to go back and listen to it because I guarantee you, I said whatever was on my heart and my mind at that time. Yeah. If that offended them, I'm not going to go back and change that. That was, by the way, that's their choice, not mine. Yeah. They just said they're offended. I'm not. Yeah. I said what I think and believe and convicted on. Right. And so that you're right. That's where it becomes, the fuzziness becomes as though we go, well, I have to change my message because someone said something to me. Right.
Right. And if I piggyback on that, the next piece of that is, sometimes you might think, well, what I have conviction for, what I have passion about is raising kids. But what I sell is like bookkeeping, right? Like those aren't like, I don't know how to connect the dots on those. Like, how do I go out and say to the world what I believe and am good at in parenting and then tie that back into getting customers for bookkeeping, right? Which is the whole thing of like what we do with shows. When you can build a tribe, here's what I tell people, like, if you could build a tribe around people who have a similar interest in parenting and they love the way you think about parenting, how many of the, if they were business people, how many of those people have bookkeeping as a need? Yeah. Start with the thing you have conviction for and then work it back to the business. But so many people are like, oh, they start with the business and because they start with the business, they're often missing the conviction or the voice.
Yes.
I mean, how much voice, well, I'm not a bookkeeper, so I'm like, how much voice can you have around bookkeeping? I know bookkeepers have a good voice.
Like, I was really stretching my mind to think about how to tie that together. I mean, I did. I could eventually get there like you did, but I was like, man, I don't know. Because numbers are my thing from a sense of, I understand economics and math and business math, but I don't like to do the books and that kind of stuff.
Well, but this is probably, we're going to like way more detail than we need to, but the just so that nobody's like lost, like I call it backstory, right? Like your professional backstory, and your backstory just lives in everything that you do. So as you talk about, if you have a show about parenting and you say, look guys, as a busy bookkeeper, one of the things I realize is like how I show up at home really matters. Like when I come home from a day of books, keeping books, blah, 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 whatever I do, like I want to be present for my kids. And so we just put what you do professionally in the backstory of the conversation, right?
Well, how about this? What if not? Because it's also one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast was maybe it's not so much about how to tie it in. I mean, I think it is to tie it in, but what if it's also not an either or, but what if it's also that the fact that you have a voice in a platform like this in a format creates a legacy for those children you're passionate about to someday figure out what you did and how you did it and all those things. Like I've come across some letters my grandfather wrote about his business. And I'm like, wouldn't it have been amazing if he had a podcast show I could go back and watch and listen to his struggles and those things at that time? Yeah. So one of the reasons to create a podcast like this and find your voice and put it on the right format is the legacy it leaves. Like this is the honest truth. And it's funny because my kids will probably listen to this. My kids were one of the first people that subscribed to my YouTube channel, and they get these podcasts. They will listen to these.
Nice.
And that's what blows me away is like my kids are listening to this podcast.
Yeah.
Because it's important to them. They want to follow out and hear what dad's doing. So that's why you just never know who's listening to your voice. It's important to, find a platform and a format.
And moreover, I mean, so good. So I love that because I've got a new podcast coming out that I want to have you on my show, by the way. But it's exactly about that, right? Which is about legacy. And sometimes we don't take the big leap out into with our voice out into the world because we feel limited by the profession we try to sell, right? We have this thing that we're trying to sell when in reality we might have a passion that is over here that has way bigger reach, but because it's not attached to how we sell a thing or make money, we don't go public with that conviction. And I think that's not only a disservice to the rest of us who could benefit from your contribution, but you don't get to know yourself as the big contribution that you were born to be because you're sitting there in a small container trying to market whatever services you have when you have a bigger message.
Well, and then the other message is you could also show how the power of building a successful business allows you also additional time to go live that passion, right? So I coached high school football for years because I played high school and college football. I love football. I coach my kids. Like I probably should talk more about how building successful businesses has allowed me to do that, which is a passion of mine. And I've had a hard time connecting that to business. But the reality is because I've built a business that's worth owning and feeds my life, it allows me the opportunity to go do those things.
So good. I love it. Well, I mean, we started with this episode with, how do you choose what marketing to do? And it's evolved in this awesome conversation about really just finding your voice. And my hope is that you listening to this have some inspiration, some things that quiet, still voice that is like speaking to you like, hey, this is the thing. And we're giving you permission to go out into the world with the real message you have. So any final words of wisdom, Chaz, on finding your voice?
I would just start telling your stories, start sharing, you're an expert at something. You have a voice, you have an opinion that matters and start sharing it. You'll be amazed at who will listen, who will give you feedback. And by the way, the feedback is what will help you find your voice. Yeah. So get started.
So good. This is such an important message. I love this. Chaz, if people want to learn more about Master Networks, where can they go?
Well, they can go visit our brand new website, masternetworks.com. They can learn how to start a chapter, how to find a chapter, how to join us as a member of this movement, helping entrepreneurs not be the statistic of 8 in 10 that fail in the first 18 months. So come join Master Networks.
I love it. Masternetworks.com. Thanks, Chaz. Thanks for a great episode, and we'll catch you in the next one.
All right, be well, Chris.